ever feel stuck? Like, you know you should be doing something, it'd be good for you, you'd even enjoy it, but you just can't get started. Today, we're going to talk about why that is. It all comes down to your brain.
Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. We're talking about dopamine today. Most people think it's all about pleasure, but it's really more about motivation.
So it's what gets us up and going.
Yeah, it's the drive towards rewards. A simple way to understand it is to look at these experiments with rats.
Oh, okay, rats. I'm intrigued.
So, scientists gave two rats levers to press, and each time they pressed it, they'd get a little bit of food.
Okay, standard rat stuff.
But one rat had normal dopamine levels, and the other had depleted dopamine levels.
So, like, was the low dopamine rat just not interested in the food?
No, they still enjoyed the food when they got it, but they just weren't motivated to work for it. The rat with normal dopamine levels was the only one who would press the lever.
So both rats liked the reward, but only one was driven to go get it.
Exactly. And it's the same with us. We all have things we enjoy, but sometimes we just lack the motivation to go after them.
So, like, procrastinating on a project, even though you'd feel good once it's done, or
Yeah.
skipping that workout, even though you know you'll feel great afterwards.
Exactly. That initial spark to get started, that's dopamine.
So it's kind of like the energy to pursue the reward, not the enjoyment of the reward itself.
Precisely.
It makes you wonder, like, how much of our lives are influenced by this dopamine system?
Oh, it's huge. It's been essential for human evolution. It's what pushed us to explore, to invent, to build societies. But
Ain't you?
in the modern world, well, it's a different story.
Because we're surrounded by things that trigger dopamine all the time.
Exactly. Junk food, social media, streaming services, all designed for instant gratification.
So are we basically overstimulating our dopamine system?
We are, and it leads to something called dopamine desensitization.
Okay, now I'm really interested.
Imagine, it's like your taste buds getting numb to sugar. You keep needing more and more to get the same effect.
So we're constantly chasing that dopamine high, but we never really reach it.
Right, you end up feeling dissatisfied and unmotivated, even when you're surrounded by things that should be pleasurable.
So what can we do about it?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And that's what we'll be talking about next.
I can't wait.
You know what's interesting? Sometimes a bit of discomfort can actually make us enjoy things more later.
Wait, really? So like pain or struggle actually makes us happier?
Think about it, that feeling after a tough workout, or finishing a difficult project.
Yeah, you feel amazing.
Those things we work for, they feel way more rewarding.
Than the stuff that comes easy.
Exactly. And there's research to back this up.
Like, our brains actually respond better to rewards after we've had to work for them.
Yeah, like you've earned it. It's like your dopamine system gets reset and you become more sensitive to pleasure.
So, struggling a little actually helps us enjoy things more in the long run.
Exactly. That's fascinating.
A good example is cold plunges.
Like jumping into freezing water. Yeah. I know it doesn't sound fun,
Definitely not my first choice.
but people swear by it. They say it makes them feel amazing afterwards.
And what's the science behind that?
Well, there was a study at the University of Prague.
Okay.
They found that after a cold plunge, dopamine levels in the brain spike
Wow,
for
really?
over 2 hours.
So, like, your brain rewards you for going through that discomfort.
Exactly.
Hmm.
It's not about the cold water itself. It's about overcoming the challenge.
So should we all be taking ice baths now?
Haha, not necessarily. The point is, embracing challenges can enhance pleasure. but, within healthy limits.
So it's all about finding that balance.
Right. We don't want to avoid pleasure altogether.
But maybe we should be more mindful about the easy stuff.
Yeah, those quick dopamine hits. We need to seek out things that require effort. Things that give us a sense of accomplishment.
This is making a lot of sense to me. But changing habits is tough.
It is. But awareness is the first step. What are your dopamine triggers? What are the things you do that give you that instant gratification?
Okay, so once you know what they are, then what?
You start by limiting your exposure to them.
So, like, less social media, less junk food.
Yeah, exactly. And at the same time, start incorporating more challenging activities.
So learn a new skill. Or tackle a creative project.
Right. Push yourself a little.
This is really helpful information. But I imagine it can feel a little overwhelming for some people.
Oh, absolutely. It's one thing to understand the science, but putting it into practice is a whole other challenge.
So how do we bridge that gap?
It's about empowerment. Knowing how your brain works gives you the power to make conscious choices.
So we can take control.
Yes, and create the lives we want.
I like that.
It's about finding joy in the pursuit of goals, not just in the rewards themselves.
It's not about deprivation then. It's about finding a healthier way to experience pleasure.
Exactly. It all comes back to balance.
Embracing challenges and enjoying the rewards.
Yeah.
This reminds me of that rat experiment you mentioned.
Yeah.
It seems like that really illustrates the connection between dopamine and our drive to achieve things.
Absolutely.
The low dopamine rats still like the food, but it just couldn't be bothered to press the lever.
Yeah.
I feel like that happens to us all the time. We might have things we want to do, things we know we'd enjoy, but we just can't seem to get started.
Right. The motivation isn't there.
So it's not that we don't want it. It's that we lack the drive to go after it.
Exactly. It's like the difference between wanting to start a business and actually taking the steps to do it.
I see. Or wanting to get in shape versus actually getting off the couch and going for a run.
Exactly. It's that initial push that's powered by dopamine.
It's like the bridge between wanting something and actually doing something about it.
You got it. And understanding this connection can be really empowering.
Because then you can start working with your brain instead of against it.
Exactly.
This is really eye-opening. I'm starting to see how it all ties together.
It's all connected.
By understanding dopamine, we can make better choices.
About how we spend our time. Our energy.
It's fascinating.
It is.
And while we've talked a lot about the negative side of things.
Yeah, the dopamine traps.
It's important to remember that dopamine isn't a bad thing.
No, not at all. It's essential.
It's all about finding that balance.
Right.
And using this knowledge to make positive changes.
To live a more fulfilling life.
Now, speaking of dopamine, we can't really talk about this without mentioning addiction.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Because when we talk about addiction, we often focus on the substance or the behavior.
Right.
But it's really all about dopamine, isn't it?
It is. It's a disruption of the dopamine system.
So it's not that these things are inherently bad.
Yeah.
It's that they hijack our reward system.
Exactly. And it can happen with so many things. Drugs, alcohol, gambling, gaming, even social media in some cases.
Anything that gives you those intense dopamine hits.
Yeah. If you're not careful, it can become a problem.
So it's like a more extreme version of that pleasure trap we talked about earlier. We're constantly chasing that high.
But it's never enough.
And it ends up controlling our lives.
And I think that's why understanding dopamine is so important.
Yeah, it helps us see addiction in a different light.
It's not a moral failing, it's a treatable condition.
And there's less stigma.
Exactly.
It's about understanding the brain.
And how it can be rewired.
So how does this knowledge help us treat addiction?
Well, for starters, it helps us understand that willpower isn't always enough.
Right, you can't just tell someone to stop.
Exactly. Their brain has been hijacked. It needs help to recover.
So it's about more than just addressing the substance or behavior.
Right.
It's about helping people rewire their brains and restore that dopamine balance.
Exactly. It's a combination of therapies, medications, lifestyle changes.
This has been so insightful.
I'm glad you're finding it helpful.
We've covered so much.
From dopamine basics to addiction.
And the power of embracing challenges.
So it's all connected.
I feel like I have a much better understanding of my own brain now.
That's great to hear.
And I hope our listeners are feeling the same way.
Me too.
You know, it's amazing how much we can learn from just one little molecule.
It really is.
Dopamine is so powerful.
It drives so much of our behavior.
And understanding it can really help us live better lives.
Absolutely.
You know, it's kind of scary how much our environment influences us.
Oh, absolutely. Like, just think about all the advertising we see every day.
It's everywhere.
It's all designed to trigger those dopamine responses.
Buy this, get that, watch this now.
Exactly. Instant gratification.
It's no wonder we're all so hooked on that dopamine rush.
It's like a constant bombardment.
So how do we break free?
Well, I think the first step is awareness.
Like recognizing that it's happening?
Yeah, understanding the game.
And then we can make conscious choices.
We have more control than we think.
This has been such a fascinating conversation.
It
I
has.
feel like I understand my own brain so much better now.
That's the goal.
But knowledge is only part of it, right?
Right. The real challenge is putting it into action.
So what advice would you give to our listeners? The ones who are feeling stuck, unmotivated?
Well, first of all, I'd say you're not alone. We all struggle with this.
It's so easy to fall into those dopamine traps.
It is. But there's hope. Understanding dopamine is the first step.
And then we can start to make changes.
Break free from that cycle of instant gratification and reclaim our motivation.
And find true fulfillment.
Exactly.
This has been an amazing exploration.
It has.
And I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, remember, understanding your brain is the key to living a better life.
Absolutely.
Keep learning, keep exploring.
And keep pursuing those meaningful goals.
And for a little musical inspiration,
Yeah.
I recommend checking out I Don't Like the Drugs, but the Drugs Like Me by Marilyn Manson.
Oh, that's a good one.
It really captures the complexity of pleasure and addiction.
It does.
Until next time, folks.